So we're going to continue on with our C++ here. So today we're going to be talking about the different types of comparisons. So we did arithmetic, so we're going to just replace some of this stuff with comparisons, and we're also going to go over loops and how loops use comparisons. So let's go ahead and just replace some of these. Actually, it's a perfect number. But we are going to need one more. Copy that one. Okay, so what have I put here? So there are different types of comparisons, and most of them come from math, and there are some that you will see that are a little different than math and are unique to programming. Alright, so if you notice this one, this is a greater than sign. So if what is on the left is greater than what is on the right, it returns true. The second one here is a less than sign. So if whatever's on the left is less than what's on the right, then it becomes true. So this is a less than. And this guy right here is basically the same as the first two. You could use them, of course you don't use both of them, you use either or, so you add the equal sign to this guy, or you add the equal sign to this guy. And that means basically less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. So in this case, greater than or equal to, or less than. Or less than or equal to. And here you see greater than or equal to, and you see that the equal sign is always on the right of the greater than or less than sign. And this guy here is the equals to. And you remember here that the reason why we don't use one single equal sign is because it would just set that variable equal to that number. Thus, it would always be true, which is a big problem in programming. Big problem. It could cause infinite loops all over the place. So you use two equal signs to simplify if it's equal to that specific number, character, or whatever. Now these guys here are called pipes, and pipes are basically, you get those by hitting shift and hitting the key above the enter sign. Now two pipes represents a OR. So basically what you could do is you could say 5 is greater than 0, or 5, 0 is less than 5. So basically what has to happen is both of these either one can be true, then the whole thing's true. So if this is true, or if this is true, then the whole thing is true. And this is basically a and sign, which is exact same thing. Which basically means that, where did it go? Is that both of these have to be true in order for this conditional to be true. Also, another cool one is called the bang. And the bang is basically negates. So it's basically a negative sign. So for example, if we have 5 is, if we do a parenthesis, usually you simplify it by a parenthesis. And this is called a bang, and of course it's just an exclamation mark, but we call it a bang. So here's a bang. 5 is greater than 0, which is true, but because there's a bang, it will flip it so it will be false. So this is false. So inside's true, then this turns it into being false. And then vice versa, same thing. If we did 0 is greater than 5, this is false, this flips it to true. So it's basically like looking at a negative sign in parentheses. Alrighty, and that's basically it. So let's go in here and do some other things with that. So let's say let's use the CN that we learned and do a talk about some loops. Actually, let's take some more notes here. So loops. So now there are 3 different types of loops. So there's an if loop. So an if loop is basically a one-time thing where it only goes through once. And it does it with whatever's inside the parameters. So inside the parameters, we would put the conditional. So in this case, as you see, 5 is greater than 0. If 5 is greater than 0, it will go into these brackets here. If you remember from our comments, you could do the asterisk. I haven't memorized the numbers yet. I memorized where all the other keys are except for the numbers. Okay. So right there. So if 5 is true, then it will go through and just do cout, do hello or whatever, and then do end line. So if this is true, which it is, it will go inside. If it is not true, if we do greater than, it will jump over. And also another addition to the if loop is we could have an else statement, which basically means that if this is false, is that if this guy is false, it will, let me go ahead and bring this down a little bit because we already know what's there at the top. Okay, so if this is false, it will jump into this else and do only what's inside the else. And remember, this only goes through once. It does it once and then it's done, and then it's over. So an if only goes into this if it's true, and only goes into this if it's false. And you could have an if without an else, but you can't have an else without an if. Okay, and then we have a while loop. A while loop is exactly as an if loop, but it could go on forever. It just keeps going through until whatever is inside this conditional here is false. So while 5 is greater than 0, then you do the cout true, and then you do end line, right? End line, etc., etc. But this brings on the big problem. So whiles could bring about something called an infinite loop. As you see here, this loop is never false. It will keep going forever. Basically what happens is, depending on your machine and how much RAM, processing power, etc., it will keep going on forever and never crash until you hit the square box and close out your program. So it will just keep going on and hang your program. Your program will sit there and seem like it's doing nothing, or basically in this case it will keep printing out true forever, which is a big problem. So most of the time you use a variable or something that you could change. So for example, we have cache. So let's say that cache, while cache is less than 0, and we do a simple arithmetic, which I didn't go over, but this is called an increment, which basically just adds 1 to cache, and this is a decrement, which just basically subtracts 1 from cache. So let's say that while cache is greater than 1 and we set greater than 0, and we set cache to 5. Then eventually this will become false because it goes through and it turns cache, and it takes down the number of the value inside cache every time until eventually this guy will be less than 0 or equal to 0. Once it's equal to 0, it will stop unless you put a equal to sign there. Alrighty, so that is a while loop. Now our final loop is the for loop. A for loop is very, there's also a couple other ones, but they're very similar, and they're just for saving time, and they could sometimes cause problems with programs, but I still like to use them. You'll see them later on. So a for loop, basically it's a very, very simple loop. Just like the while loop, it is a continuous loop, but it keeps everything inside. So usually what happens is you have 3 different parts inside. This is where you would usually set up your counter loop. So here is a counter loop, your counter, sorry. So we're going to declare an int I, which usually means index. That's usually what programmers use as a counter, is equal to 6, right? And then here's where you use your conditional, just like that while loop. This is where you do like, while int is greater than 0. And all are separated by semicolons, as you see. Finally, you do you have the what it does, the operation, what it does at the end of execution. So at the end of the blocks of execution, we want it to decrement I. And as you'll see right now, we'll have, and then it would be like C out, just outprint I, and then end L. Now basically what would happen is I would start out as 6, and I is greater than 0, so it will jump in, and once it goes to this end bracket, it will subtract I. It will take one number away from I, and bring that down 1. And yeah, and then just keep going until this conditional in here is false. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get going with some programming up here using some inputs and stuff. Alright, so let's do some simple inputs and some simple comparisons to see if your cash, if you have more cash than you have quarters. So here we're just going to get rid of this guy, and we're just going to say if cash is greater than quarters, then outprint quarters. And we're just going to get this guy. We're going to want to copy this. You'll see why in a second. And we're going to want to outprint more cash. Then we're going to add in an else, and we're going to say we're going to paste that, and we're going to say more quarters. Bam, done with that already. So then it's going to ask us to input in those two values just like we did in the previous one. Also, I'm rendering a video at the same time, so it's going to take a little while to compile here. Hopefully not too long. Uh-oh, I missed a semicolon. Which line? Line 8. Oops. Okay, let's build that again. I got an error there, and you're probably not seeing the error because I cut out the console just to make the words bigger. So, but I had an error. I was missing a semicolon there. Alright, so let me bring this in so you guys could see this. Okay, enter in a variable for cash. We're going to make cash larger. So let's say 10, and quarters is going to be 4. And it says you have more cash than you have quarters. And just to show you that I didn't program it to do that, to just say cash, let's try it again. Let's make cash smaller than quarters. So 4 and 6 for quarters. And it says, hey, you have more quarters, except for I butchered the spelling of quarters. Okay, alright, so let's go, let's do a simple while loop here. Let's say, what am I going to do for while loop? Let's just do a simple while loop. Check this out. Let's do a while cash is less than quarters. So while cash is less than quarters, we're going to increment. We're going to increment cash. Plus plus, and we're going to copy paste a C out, so it says so basically what this is going to do is it's going to use cash to keep incrementing cash until it finds what quarters are. So in this case you would technically not know what quarters are, or quarters is. The computer knows, and you know because you inserted it in, but it should be, so let's say, so cash has got to be less than quarters, right? Cash is less than quarters. So we're going to say like 4 for cash, and like 15 for quarters. So it basically takes cash and increments it until it gets to 15. As you see here, it takes cash and increments it until it hits quarters. If you really want to see that, let's go ahead. You could do an easy thing called a debug line, and then just put in cache here. And you'll basically see it increment as it happens. So let's do that again. Let's do like 2 and do like 20. There you see cache increment until it hits 20, and then it outputs 20. So there you can see the while loop at work. Now let's do a for loop doing like the same thing. So let's keep this on the same line, and we'll get rid of all the rest of this stuff. You can keep that. I'll get rid of it. You can keep those notes if you want them. So let's just turn this into a for loop and see how much, or actually let's just put a for loop underneath it to see how much cleaner a for loop is than this loop. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, I guess you can't. You need an, actually, yeah, let's do this. Int I equals 0, and then we're going to say while I is less than quarters, and then I plus plus. You saw that Visual Basic there automatically adjusted that for me, which is really, really cool. So that's a bonus. And then the only difference here is, of course, I can't. Actually, I want to output I. As you notice here, the only problem is that I can't increment before I output it. So, I mean, most of the time I usually use while loops. I don't really like for loops, but you can see how much smaller it is as far as the inside. I mean, you're only missing one here, but this is technically another line. So you got 1, 2, 3 calls, and inside here you only have 1 call. So it's a little bit better. Let's go ahead. Where did I not put this guy here? Yeah, so you don't want a semicolon there at the end. It's already isolated. Oopsies. Hit the wrong button there. Alright, so let's do a variable for cache. This doesn't really matter. The variable for quarters matters. I believe I had it set to quarters. Yeah, quarters. Alright, so let's do like 20 then. So basically you see it do it twice. And here it is not doing that because we're not incrementing before we output. See here we're incrementing before we output, so it's going to give us an error there. So I mean you could basically do like cache plus 1 or whatever. So yeah, that's why I stick with a while. A for is pretty solid. It doesn't really. I like setting stuff up before the while, so I'm a big fan of the if and the while. Those are the main ones I use. I don't use for too often, but you see that it could have some capabilities. It all depends on your style and how you want to use it. Okay, so that is basically a condition. Comparisons. Using those comparisons as conditional inside the parameters of loops, and one of the biggest, it basically adds intelligence to your program by comparing two things. That's what loops is. Very, very important, big part of programming. Makes your program smart and be able to do certain things that make it think and compare two objects and make a decision compared on those two objects by what you tell it to do. Alright, so it's been Steven from the LegitTechTutorials. If you like this video, please subscribe for more videos like it in this series and other series as well. If you have any questions, email me. The link for the book is in the description. And if you like these videos, please support my campaign on Patreon. The link is in the description. You also see the logo there on the bottom of all my videos from now on. Alright, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next video, and peace.